Hi, it's Matt Farr here, and welcome to my slideshow on what type of raw diet will work best for me. You've probably been attracted to watching this slideshow because you've heard of all the benefits of going raw. Maybe you've read or heard around the subject a little bit and discovered that there are many different types of raw food diets, and many ways in which you can improve the nutritional value and digestibility of raw food. A raw food diet is generally defined as a diet where 75 to 100% of the food consumed is raw. Here I'd like to include a quick summary of the main areas associated to the raw food movement, some arguments for and some arguments against using such diets and practices. It's not meant to be a comprehensive review, just my opinion on each area as I understand them. Towards the end of this article, I would also like to introduce a means of identifying which of these diets are right for you. So the areas I'm going to look at include dairy, grains, legumes, superfoods, juicing, dehydrating, sprouting, fermented foods, the alkaline diet, food combining diet, vegetarianism, veganism, fruitarianism, and raw meat. So let's kick off with dairy. Some raw foodists will eat dairy products while others will avoid it completely. If consumed, raw dairy products will be the food of choice. Raw, or another term for raw, would be unpasteurized dairy products. So the arguments for dairy include that raw dairy will be a good source of bacteria and immune antibodies. Obviously this only applies to raw unpasteurized dairy. The good bacteria and immune antibodies will be killed in any kind of heat processing. Can be a source of calcium, and it's fairly convenient and in some cases easily sourced. Certainly in the case of raw cheese, other raw dairy products are a little bit more difficult to source. So the arguments against dairy is that dairy has been in the human diet for less than 10,000 years. And what this means is that our digestive and immune systems are yet to adapt to eating them. It typically takes around 100,000 years for 1/10 of 1% of the human gene to evolve. So with that in mind, we really have not adapted to eating dairy products. Research also shows that most people have an immune response to dairy. This may be obvious and result in some obvious symptoms, and in some cases there may be very little symptoms shown. Now, no other animal consumes mother's milk other than in their infancy, and obviously milk only comes from the mother of a cow or a human being, goat, etc. Pasteurized dairy is also particularly harmful as the proteins and fats will have been damaged and made rancid from the heat processing and pasteurization processes. To add to that is another process known as hydrogenation, which actually is designed to mix the fat in the milk up with the rest of the milk, and that can also damage the fat proteins. You can also find the calcium molecules are damaged in the processing of pasteurized dairy products. So the next area is grains, and some, again like dairy, some raw foodists will eat grains and others will avoid them completely. If consumed, only whole grains will be consumed and are generally soaked or sprouted before being cooked. So the main argument for grains is that they're convenient and easily sourced. The arguments against grains bit like dairy, or very much like dairy, in that they have been in the human diet for less than 10,000 years, when we started to employ farming methods to develop grains as a part of our diets. And just like with dairy, we haven't really evolved enough for our digestive and immune systems certainly haven't evolved enough to consuming such food. Again, like dairy, a lot of people will react to grains, particularly gluten and wheat grains. Whilst whole grains are a better option and they can certainly be more nutritional and contain a lot more nutrients, they can still cause a great deal of problems for many people. So there is certainly a big argument to be made against whether they're refined or heavily or unprocessed grains. It's not really going to make that much difference as to whether or not the body reacts to them or not. So processed versions are certainly a lot worse and are linked to a great deal of health problems. And the other issue with grains is they simply can't be consumed raw. They need to be cooked or processed to some level if they're to be digestible. Although that said, sometimes they are consumed raw, which is not necessarily a good thing. The next area to look at is legumes. Again, just like with grains, some raw foods will eat legumes and others will avoid them completely. And again, like grains, if consumed, they'll be soaked or sprouted before being cooked. A good source of protein, some arguments for legumes is that they are a good source of protein and carbohydrates, and can be a good source of minerals and vitamins. They can also add a bit of variety to the diet. The downside, or the arguments against, are again very much like grains in that they've been in the diet less than 10,000 years, and there are question marks as to how much we've evolved to being able to digest them effectively. They also, another argument is they are a little bit more inconvenient to be consumed because they need to be soaked before cooking in order for them to be digested properly. Obviously you can buy your tin can versions of pre-cooked or pre-soaked, and really they're not really the types of foods you should be consuming if you want a healthy body. The other downside of them is they really can't be consumed raw. The next area to look at are superfoods. Now, superfoods are simply foods that contain extraordinary levels of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, or phytonutrients. Some common examples might include things like goji berries, cacao, wheatgrass, or even things like broccoli and spinach. Now, some arguments for superfoods is that they'll contain much higher levels of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants,